Great. Oh my God, this is so exciting too. I feel like my favorite place to be is generally in a room full of researchers. So very excited to be here, very excited to talk about qualitative analysis. A big thank you to Colette, Alec, Maggie for planning this, and the whole Learners organization for just putting together this really incredible conference. And honestly, qualitative analysis is one of my favorite topics, but it's also literally the most frustrating thing too, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about that. So just like first up, a little bit about me. So as Colette said, I'm a user researcher at Instagram working on the shopping team. Previously, I was an insights lead at Spotify. I have a background in marketing, kind of fell into research about like 9 years ago, a mix of in-house experience as well as agency experience too. And, you know, as Colette has said continuously, like what I'm going to be talking about is just one person's perspective. So I would like this to be more of a conversation that I'm starting with all of you to really think a little bit deeper about our qualitative analysis practice. And just like throwback, this is me in field research probably in 2018. In Colombia, surrounded by Post-its, surrounded by notes and hydration too. I feel like this is generally the scene after or during research too. So yeah, so let's start off with talking a little bit about the research process. So I'm sure we're all familiar with this process. We talked a lot about planning yesterday already, especially with Raz's talk. A lot of good research really requires that preparation. So what happens after planning is usually field work, right? So we are conducting interviews, we're meeting with our users, we're bringing our stakeholders along, and then we get a lot of data, we analyze the data, and ideally we share out the findings, right? So at the end of the day, if we really think about what research is, it's understanding the questions we want to answer and then going about answering those questions. So really for the talk, I really want to talk about the process, right? How do we get from questions to answers? So first off, it's talking a little bit about like what is qualitative analysis. Like we all do it, but like how have we really broken down what the process is? So I just want to like look at this picture. Do people feel good looking at this? It's like nicely organized. It's really neat. How many people like really love organizing things? Yeah, okay, a few, yeah. So I really want to have another lens of looking at what analysis is through the lens of organizing. So I was watching The Home Edit on Netflix. I don't know if people watch that. It's basically a show about it's two people, Clea and Joanna, and they go into people's homes, workspaces, closets, and basically just organize the heck out of things. And it's really fun because I'm like, oh, that's what we do for research, right? Like you have a bunch of data, you like clean it up, you find these themes, you label it, and then you have a beautiful transformed space. So I'm going to talk us through like how that is. So they have a process that they go through where they edit, categorize, contain, and maintain is what they call it. Which is very similar to our own analysis process, right? So a lot of this is very familiar with us, and you know, especially after field work, what do? We synthesize our data, look at the spread of the data that we have, we start coding, we start finding themes, looking at what groups really go together, and then we also think about the impact, right? Like what's the story that we really want to tell around the data that we're gathering? So I'm going to take us through like each phase of this. So first is kind of Hello? Okay, great. So with the first stage, it's really about assessing what we have, right? So we finish field work. We really need to understand what's the data that we've collected, right? What are the artifacts? Have we collected entries from a diary study? Have we collected actual artifacts and like worksheets that people have completed? Do we have transcripts? Do we have video recordings? It's kind of really taking everything that you have out and assessing what your data is. And you don't start categorizing yet, right? So like if we look back to organizing, the best way to organize is to pull out everything that you have and lay it all out there, right? You don't want to leave things behind that you actually need to sort and categorize and organize. So the next phase is categorizing, which is coding, right? So at this phase, what we do is really decide what belongs together. So if you're organizing, you kind of want to look at, okay, so I have a bunch of makeup products. Maybe that should actually be grouped together and, assessed and brought together. And it's really seeing, taking a step back and like looking at the spread of items and data that you have. And it's also giving yourself the space to reflect, hey, what really belongs together with the flow of my life, right? If we talk about organizing. And when we look at analyzing and when we're coding data, it's really trying to find the categories that feel intuitive to what your data is really telling you, which also goes back to the research goals, which I'll talk about more. And then it's about containing, right? So how can we really think about grouping and labeling items and finding those themes, right? So a lot of the codes that we put together ladder up into like bigger themes of what we find meaningful in our research that really connects back to what our research questions were. And then maintain, so creating a lasting system. So if we go back to organizing as the theme, what we want to think about is like the transformed space, right? Like the reason why we're organizing something is because a space is no longer really serving what we need it to be. It's kind of become chaotic. It's the same thing with research in the way that we look at impact, right? So at the end goal, what we have is transformation. It's a new way to see a space, especially depending on like what industry you're in, what topic you're researching, and organizing. It creates a new way to move through a space. So that's really the goal of what analysis is impact, and creating a new way or perspective of understanding a person, an experience, product, or a feature. So this is kind of what is qualitative analysis, at least from my perspective. And now I want to just talk more about like what I'm going to be talking about with the focus of today's talk. So there's a few things that I'm not going to be doing because I just don't have enough time. So we won't be focusing on how to. Like I'm not going to talk us through like how to code or like how to analyze data and like really nitpicking that, because there's a lot of great resources for that already, and these are, you could definitely snapshot a picture of this, but this is just like reading that I found to be really helpful, especially in the qualitative coding process, right? There's a lot of different tactics and coding methods that you could use, and these books really provide a helpful breakdown on the different methods that you can employ, and it's about thinking about what works best for you, right? So that's the thing about analysis that I'll be taking us through. So one of the things that I really want us to think about is how we overlook analysis often and time again. I think Colette referred to it as like kind of the hidden stepsister of like what we talk about in terms of like research methodology and like our research practice. We don't spend nearly enough time talking about qualitative analysis. I'm going to talk about why analysis matters too, especially in up-leveling our craft. And then just leave you with different ways to think about how you can improve the process. So really my goal is to shine a light on qualitative analysis and really think about how we as a community of researchers, qualitative experts, user researchers really come together to build out knowledge and start really thinking more about qualitative analysis. So the first one, often overlooking analysis. So what I think is really the heart of research is qualitative analysis, right? It's the process that's so central to like how we arrive at insights. And like by a show of hands, like when was the last time you talked to someone about your analysis process? Yeah. Right, we don't talk about it. There's not a lot of hands raised, and like, for those that are remote, definitely answer or ask in the chat. When we talk about research, or whether it's with your product managers, your designers, or even your team of researchers, like if you are managing researchers or reporting to a user research manager, we spend more time talking about research scope and research methodologies, right? Or we talk about the research findings and insights. Rarely do we spend the time talking about our process of like how we arrive there. We don't give it the attention it deserves, and we don't spend as much time really talking about that rationalization. Like, why did we code our data like that? How did we come up with these themes? Were there trade-offs that we had to make in the process of our analysis, like during thematic grouping, that we just kind of swept under the rug because we do the process by ourselves? There's so much value in talking about the way that we make sense of our data that we don't do. And the other thing is that people really expect analysis to be easy. So like, let's say that you finish your interview, right? You like get a good night's sleep because you just wrapped up field work. You wake up the next day, like you have a bunch of data that you need to like now begin to analyze. Like, how are people feeling? Like, you can shout out emotions. Like, what's the general sentiment that you feel after field work? Dread? Yeah. Any other feelings? Overwhelmed? Mm-hmm. Exhausted? Yep. You just did like 25 interviews all in 1 week, right? You're like, there's a lot to process here. And there's a lot of anxiety and dread. And I feel like really in preparation for this talk too, when Colette asked me to do this, I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to talk about? Like, what do I have to say about qualitative analysis? So I actually talked to like other researchers, I talked to my mentors, and like, I just think generally the sentiment that we have about analysis is that it's pretty hard to do, right? It's kind of, analysis paralysis is a real issue. And really, depending on your research method, your field work, you have mountains of data to now go through, right? There's videos to review, there's transcripts to watch. And then conducting research is already taxing, it's exhausting, right? And now you have to jump into analysis. There's a lot to process here, and I think it's just like addressing the elephant in the room where we do kind of dread qualitative analysis. And I think it's just acknowledging it. Like, it's okay. We all feel this way. We all are sharing these emotions around it. And there's just so many questions swirling around us. Where do I start? Do I look at the participants first? Do I try to clean up my data first? Do I have to check back with my team because I've essentially been checked out for the whole week running these research, right? There's a lot going on in our minds. And I think, one of the things when we overlook analysis is that we really don't recognize how difficult it can be to do. And there's this expectation that it's easy, right? Like, a lot of our stakeholders are like, you just group the data together, it's affinity mapping, you find the common themes, you see, what participants have said more of, and like, that's your findings. And I think there's like so many more layers that we need to peel back in order to really get at, what we're trying to do, which is like meaningful insights. And then the other thing around overlooking analysis is that people expect it to be done fast, right? And a show of hands, like, how many people have felt like they've rushed through their analysis process? Okay, yeah, and you kind of have to make these decisions, right? Like, if your stakeholders asking you for the research, right? People are expecting you to, at the end of the week, or like the same week that you just finished field work, give some insights, right? Hey, what are your high-level takeaways, right? You get that ping from your product manager, you get that ping from your designer, even your manager. Like, they want you to come up with this narrative, this conclusion right away, and it's like you haven't even had time to really process everything that you've gone through. So I think it's just kind of acknowledging that it makes it feel even harder to do, and I think what happens when we put this time crunch and the anxiety on the process, it just makes us feel like we do have to rush analysis. And a lot of this then means what we do is we do analysis alone, right? It's a siloed experience. We're rarely sharing our data. We're rarely having conversations about it. And we don't really allow ourselves to explore interesting nuances, details within our data. And what we do is we generalize our findings way too quick, right? We kind of like take the first answer. This looks good. This answers my research goal. Let's continue on. And I think what we need to start doing is really questioning our process of analysis, and thinking back to how we can give analysis more love and more attention, and thinking through how we can be doing that better. So now that we've kind of addressed it, it's hard to do. People expect it to be done fast, making it even harder to do. Now I want to talk about like why analysis really matters and why it really deserves more love and attention. Analysis matters because I think it's both an art and a science, right? So if we see it as an art and a science, it means that we really shouldn't rush the process, right? Like you wouldn't want someone rushing a scientific study related to testing out vaccines or like medical, experiences. And you don't want to rush art, right? You're not going to ask a painter to paint faster to get at what the picture is. So I think, if we recognize that analysis is both an art and a science, it really takes time to understand and to be done properly. So analysis being a science, to me, it's like we have this established process, right? We code the data, we find themes, we ensure that the work is really evidence-based. There's a level of rigor that we do hold ourselves accountable for, even when we do feel like we're rushing the process. We put together analysis plans where we're trying to connect our research goals, our research questions, to exactly what our method was, and thinking about, okay, how does the data that I'm collecting from my discussion guide really map back to the research goals. And it's kind of thinking about, a lot of the science behind this is like, the analysis plan is like figuring out like how the puzzles all fit together. And that's kind of the procedure that we hold ourselves accountable for when we're doing analysis. And to do it properly, we need to invest time in the process. I also believe that like analysis can be more of an art form sometime, which is probably why it makes it really hard to do. And I think sometimes we really strive for perfection of like finding the right answers, and maybe it's like the beauty is in the process. So for thinking about analysis as an art form, it's really about storytelling, right? So how do we string all the codes, the categories, the themes in a way that stakeholders and teams can really connect to what's meaningful in what we've gathered? How can we reflect on our own learnings and the process too? It's a lot of like questioning yourself, right? Like, are you reconciling any contradictions that are happening? Are you challenging your own values and belief systems depending on the learnings that you've gathered? And all of this is like a form of sense making. Like, how do I find out which insights are the most important to share? What's the story we want to tell? Parsing signal from noise. And I think like if we see analysis as an art form, what we have to think about is it's practice, right? You're not going to be a good painter or good at ceramics if you only take one class. It's a muscle you train. It's the intuition you build in figuring out, okay, this is important to explore, or these are the things I need to tease out. And the more you do it, the more that you are going to get better at it. So we shouldn't really expect perfection when we first do this. And we shouldn't expect perfection even if we've been doing this for years too. So like any craft, you really have to hone your skills and recognize like you all have your own style of doing analysis. And that's why I think we should be talking more about our processes to really think about knowledge sharing and thinking about how we can build this up over time. So analysis matters because it's complex. It's both an art and a science, and really fusing this together is part of our process to arrive and really understand what the insights are. Analysis also matters because it really emphasizes the importance of research, right? By giving analysis the time it deserves and the attention it deserves, it gives more weight into why research is important. And I think really recognizing the importance of our work and that it's an art and a science, that gives us a lot of power to stop devaluing research. And it also stops us from cheapening research, right? If it's going to be something that we feel like we can speed up, like how does that empower us when we do that, right? And I think there's this from the conversations yesterday, like this mentality shift I want us to keep talking about of not being a service to being a partner. Research isn't something a product manager can order. Research is a skill set. It's an equal partner. We have a seat at the table. And we should make sure that we're working together to figure out what needs research, not because someone tells you that research needs to be done, right? It's making sure that we're the experts in the room. And I always think about this where, do you rush a designer to say like, hey, get your wireframes out faster? Do we rush engineers to be like, hey, you need to code faster? Why do we feel like we should shortcut ourselves in the process of like, do analysis faster? Especially when we do that, we leave so much on the table, right? How many times have there been insights or like golden nuggets that you felt like were just left on the table or unexplored because you didn't have time, right? So I see a few head nods here. So I just want to kind of like really emphasize that analysis is really important in our process. So now I want to talk more about kind of like, now that we like laid it all out there, I want to talk more about what are ways and like things that we can do to really improve our process and like level up our practice of analysis, with the goal of really bringing more value to research and also just giving us the space we deserve to show up and like, stop really looking down at what we do as something that could be shortcutted. So the first thing to think about is that good analysis needs good research. So one of the things to really think about, or the three things to think about here and what this means is that analysis is only as good as the data that you collected. So when you plan research, you really need to think about your analysis in mind, really thinking deeply about what your research goals are, what your objectives are, what your key questions are, and also the participants that you're talking to, right? So ensuring that, when you're moderating, you have fully gone down a path to explore an interesting area, because once you're done with that interview, once you're done with your fieldwork, that's all the data that you have to analyze. If you have any follow-up questions as you're going through the analysis, you're not going to be able to reach back, like you could reach back out to the participant, but generally, are there questions that you still have that's lingering, right? So how do you make sure that when you're thinking about this research plan, you're also thinking about the potential connections that could be made that is worth exploring when you're in field work. It's also important to think about how methodologies have really varying analysis needs, and it's really about carving out the time that you need for analysis. A diary study produces a lot more data than probably like an hour-long usability session. How do you make sure that you're allocating in your timelines, in your research plans, the right amount of time that you need for the methodology that you've decided on? And then making sure stakeholders are invested and confident in the process. So I think this is really key. And it's not just about like sharing a research plan with the stakeholder, it's also making sure that you're bringing them along for the ride too. So in observing fieldwork and making sure that they're part of the study. It's also like getting their buy-in, right? Do they feel like this is an important research area to explore? And I think what's really key is that like having their buy-in at the start when we're planning research makes it a lot easier for us to involve them when we're talking about those learnings. It also makes it a lot easier for us to think about impact. So I want to talk through some examples here too. So Colette has talked a lot about questions, so I also want to just kind of frame this as what can you really think about when you are planning research to have a better analysis process? So the first one is just thinking about am I asking the right questions, right? So these are things that you just need to be on the lookout for, which I feel like regardless of any topic that you're talking about, there's associated uncertainties, right? Are there kind of inklings around your team in which you're talking about a product feature that might actually go in this direction or that direction? Are there any risks too, right? So risk in not exploring a topic, risk in different topics that feel like the team's not talking about it, but it's kind of the elephant in the room and it's something that should be worth exploring. And then also understanding the biases and assumptions too, right? So are there certain things that the team has really believed in that you feel hesitant about, that you really want to make sure that, we address in this research, and recognizing, especially when scoping and research and moderating. So the other one is just, am I allocating the right amount of time for the method? So it's really thinking about like being aware of the research goals and the expected complexity in finding meaningful insights too, right? So if you're doing something that's like really generative, really foundational, you are understanding human needs, context, like, you know, really understanding a behavior, that's probably going to be a lot more data to really parse through and a lot more conversations that's needed than maybe something that is more evaluative and valid, more about like validation, right? Understanding how someone uses a product might be a lot more straightforward in terms of the data that you're collecting. And again, it's also thinking about the methodology, right? So like a 2-week-long diary study is not the same as like 1 hour long usability session with 8 participants. So, you know, recognizing not just the amount of time that you need for field work, but also thinking about the analysis to follow. And then, do my stakeholders have confidence in this process? So it's kind of how thinking about like what are ways to bring your stakeholders along so they're invested from the start. And I think it goes to like, you know, from my experience, and I'm sure a lot of you have felt this way, the worst thing that can happen after a study is for stakeholders to say, I don't trust your learnings, or like, I don't really believe in that, or I don't believe in your interpretation of these insights. And our favorite statement of all is that, well, you've only talked to 8 people, so I really don't understand. You know, I really don't buy into this. Like, you need to talk to more people, or we need to look at the data. So one way to counter that is just to make sure that they're brought in. And if they're not brought in, you know, it's kind of like, say no, don't do the research, right? We have a lot more power than we think we do. And I think when stakeholders are really brought in from the start, we should also set the expectation for their role. And making sure that they, at the end, like have high confidence. They're excited about your research, right? They want to get these learnings. And they also are willing to play a crucial role in analysis, which we'll talk about later in terms of bringing people along. And I think it's like remembering the phrase where like the journey is far more interesting than the destination. So when we share out learnings to stakeholders, it's not about just giving them the insights. It's about taking them through the process of like how we get there. And yeah, so good analysis needs good research. The other ways to improve your analysis is really thinking about like questioning your own thinking, which I think is something we don't do as often. It's questioning your thinking, question others' thinkings too. And what does this mean? For me, it's really about like rejecting easy answers. So I think with analysis, you often don't fully really understand the space in the first try, right? So let's say, for example, users told you that you wanted X. So our insight is build X to improve the delight of our users, right? Like easy answer. And that's not why we're here, right? Like we're not here to just kind of like be the like interpreter of like, okay, users told us this, like let's do this. Like our job is to really figure out what is best for our users and what is best for the business, and also advocating for, you know, what is the ideal experience for what we're creating. And we really need to understand like why, right? And I think rejecting easy answers is hard. There's a lot more that we need to dig into. It requires more work. But for me, I think that's what we need to do. So researchers really need to lean into what's uncomfortable, because it's a space where I feel like our work really matters the most. And it allows us to do right by people, right? So there's, you know, if there's a learning that goes against a strategy or against the product manager's beliefs, or against the direction of the team, like, don't be afraid to like understand what that learning is, right? And bring it back to the team. It's like on us to really bring attention to that. And then the other thing is around embracing contradiction and nuance, right? So this is kind of like our way, like it's a way of thinking about this is how we can reject easy answers. think we need to understand that humans are complex. How can we really find that distinction between what people say and what they do, and really peel back the layers, not just to understand their opinion, but also their needs, right? Like, what are their kind of emotional associations or emotional feelings of why they feel a certain way, or what do they tell us, right? It's really digging deeper into that. The other thing is like understanding your interpretations, right? So it's always good to like take a step back from your data and kind of like look at what you have, right? Ask yourself, like, how did you code this data? Why did you write out these themes, right? Well, why is this your association of what came from the research? And are there parts where you've added your own expertise or your own perspective because you've been working at X company for so many years, you've seen this before, you're bringing that in? It's kind of like making sure that you question yourself and like really question your interpretation. And it's also thinking about like, could this be something different than what I believe it to be? So one of the examples I want to talk about here is thinking about this, like, let's say that you're conducting a usability study for like the homepage of a video streaming mobile app. And in your research, you observe that half the participants had a really easy time discovering something new to watch right away, while the other half took longer to find something that they like, right? And maybe the goal of the team is to like decrease time to stream or the time it takes to stream content. Like, I'm gonna let you sit on this one for a second of like, what do you recommend the team to do, right? Like, half the participants had an easy time, half of them took longer. And let's say that like a potential insight is that, hey, like, okay, we observed that participants had mixed experiences finding something that they like on the homepage. That's like a standard insight. It's not wrong, it's not right. And I think like if we apply question your thinking, what you need to look at is like, okay, rejecting easy answers, right? Like one of the questions to really think about here is that, is this the only theme or outcome that we see from the data? And it's like, maybe what we need to actually look at is their past experience with the homepage, right? Is this something that they normally do? Is this, content that people have, is this an experience that people have had before where, okay, it seems like normally it's not just a homepage design, but like anytime that they open the video streaming app, they're generally taking a while to find something, or maybe they actually land on something different. And then if we kind of really think a little bit more deeply and question that too, maybe they actually have an easier time because they gravitate towards a particular type of content of movies or series. Maybe they actually really like what's being recommended to them because it's kind of like easy to watch. It's really light and consumable versus, another type of user that is actually having a hard time finding something that they like on the homepage actually just has a different taste, right? Maybe they want to like look at something that's a little bit more thoughtful, that require more thinking. So in order to really understand what the insight is, you generally have to go past your first hunch and the first answer. And then the other thing with like embracing contradictions and nuance is thinking about like what are things that we can really dig into, whether it's like the participants' emotions or needs in that moment. So again, like embracing these really help you reject easy answers. So maybe we can look at people's emotions as they're exploring the homepage, right? So maybe the participants that actually took longer to find something were actually really enjoying their browsing experience, right? They were actually saving things along the way. Even though the time it took for them to stream something was actually longer, they actually bookmarked a bunch of stuff, and then the next time that they opened the app, they actually streamed something really quick. So it's kind of like really thinking about how we can piece those together. And then understanding your interpretations. So like thinking about how did you get to this insight? How does your perspective, value, and expertise really influence this observation? And I think what we need to like recognize in general are, our own bias and values that we bring into the observation. So I don't think it's a bad thing that when we bring our perspectives into research, you just have to be aware of when you are, right? So I think one of the bigger things that I have come to realize, especially when analyzing data, is that is this participant actually feeling this way, or am I projecting my own values and belief systems into what the participants are doing? And I think one of the things we really need to challenge is like our own truths, especially when we're learning about our users, right? Thinking about like how adaptable, how acceptable are you when you are faced with these realities, these truths from our users that are just so different from our own. You know, it's a different value system from what we do and what we know. And like, are you thinking about like reframing your truths too in order to really adapt to what the users are telling you? Or have you like rationalized it, right? Like, do you rationalize that behavior in a way that still fits your point of view? And I think it's like, you have to let research and the data really change what you know to be true. And I think it's kind of like making sure that's always in the back of our mind with like knowing what your interpretation is. And again, I think when we rush the process and we like shortcut analysis, we don't really have the time to do this. So again, it's kind of like a call to give yourself more grace and time for analysis. And other ways to improve the research or our analysis process is really connecting the dots again and again. And what does this mean is to incorporate data triangulation and really look at multiple data sources. So for this, it's like thinking about like, are there other data streams that you can connect to, right? So if it's like, is there past research that you could reference? Is there behavioral data? Can you actually work with the data scientists to really understand this? And I think what this allows you to do is really explore your hunches and intuition, right? Of like, hey, it looks like because we're seeing X in our research, I wonder how that really takes shape in the behavioral data. Do we see that people's behavior over-index in one way or the other that either like refutes what we believe or maybe like reinforces it, right? And I think a lot of it really helps us understand kind of those buried treasures with insights that we do want to unearth. And then the other thing is really understanding the context of your users and products. So like Colette talked about this with like the ads example earlier, and I think what we have to really understand is like, where does our product fit in the life of our users, right? Is it something, you know, we spend 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, like looking at this. And in reality, like how, you know, maybe it's like 5 minutes a day monthly that they maybe engage with our our products and services. So it's kind of like really thinking about this important context that we need to really like connect to understand what this all means when we're looking at the data. And the other thing is really like filtering out signal from noise. So how can we understand like what is important? And I think one of the things I really think about is like asking yourself, so what, right? Why does this actually matter to my team? Why is this important? And how can I think about like the so what to really like contextualize the observation I made? And really like help strings your narrative together, right? Like how should we use this data in a way that I can tell the team like, this is why this matters, right? It's the so what behind what we're looking at. And I think that's really important when we're doing data analysis. So I'm just going to take us through an example at Instagram. So like my team in particular is really focused on shopping. And really we want to understand how people can have the best shopping experience on Instagram. The reality is that most people are not coming to Instagram to shop. And I'm sure most of you probably feel this way, but like they come to connect with friends, they keep up with current events, they use it to express themselves, and then maybe they'll explore or follow like a brand or two and then look at new products. But that's generally at like the bottom of the list, right? So what we realize and like we keep in our minds is that like, okay, this is the context of how they're using Instagram. And what we realize is that shopping is something that is really serendipitous, right? It happens when they're engaging with friends. It happens when they're engaging with creators or businesses of like, hey, I really love this product, or hey, I really want to support this creator or support this business. How can I learn more about a product or a brand? So this is kind of an observation, right? So like most people are not coming to Instagram to only shop. Shopping really happens serendipitously as they engage with friends, creators, or business. So one of the things to really think about, like, how can we further like connect the dots is incorporating like data triangulation, right? So like being able to look at those multiple data sources. So one of the things that we asked ourselves in research is thinking about like the behavioral data, right? Like, can we proxy behaviors of shopping? What do shopping behaviors actually look like on the platform? Are the people who determine themselves as shoppers people that actively follow brands or actively save products? Should that be our audience that we're looking at to really build out a better shopping experience on the platform? The other thing is to really think about like the relationship between your users and the product too. So one of the things that we always look at is like what moments really prompt them to shop, right? What are the triggers? Is it like seeing an ad? Is it, seeing a friend share something that they bought recently, or seeing a creator share something that they really have loved and bought recently, right? If you think about your own experiences on Instagram, like what are those moments that have led you to shop? And also like thinking about what are their expectations that they have from the platform, and also thinking about like what expectations do they bring in from other sites, right? So like this really helps us contextualize people's expectations that they have when it comes to shopping in general, right? Because they're shopping on Amazon, they're shopping on Etsy, they're shopping on the Target app, the Walmart app. And there's a lot of standard best practices that people have expect when it comes to shopping ads, like shopping apps like filters, price sorting, a lot of those functionalities. And it's like, okay, what does that mean for Instagram, knowing that we're actually part of like a whole ecosystem and shopping is maybe secondary, right? How do we make sure that there's still these robust features in thinking about improving the experience when it comes to shopping? And then it's also, filtering out signal from noise, thinking about why this matters and the so what. And really, one of the important things for like this observation that we think about for our team, and specifically my team owns like the shop tab on Instagram, is really thinking about transitions, right? So like how do people transition between other jobs on Instagram to shopping jobs, and what role can the tab really play in doing that? So that's kind of an angle that I always look at when we're doing research to figure out the so what for my team when we're doing research. So the last thing is this is a big one. I think it's really inviting others in, right? I think research analysis can be really isolating, and what we need to do is start having conversations with the data, about the data and the analysis. It's about making sure that we can host collaborative analysis sessions, and also really create a shared language and understanding. So I think, in general, I think a lot of the more groundbreaking aha moments and insights have come from rich conversations I've had about the data with the people that are in these analysis sessions, right? Like we're debriefing, we just came out of field work together. What have you observed? What has my product manager observed? What has designers observed? How are they bringing in their own perspectives into what we've seen? And really like up-leveling kind of the learnings, right? It's not just me and my perspective doing this by myself. It's actually these like really rich conversations that we are having. And, when we're bringing our stakeholders along for the journey, they're invested because they're part of the insights creation, right? Like we're having these conversations with them. They're bringing in their perspective in. And it's about kind of like that externalization that happens where we feel like other people can contribute their thoughts, their opinions into the process. So we can arrive at like, okay, these are the insights that matter, and here's what we can now do about them. So this is just an example of like running like collaborative analysis sessions. So this is what I found to like have worked well in terms of like a sample agenda. It's like having these joint insights creation sessions. So, making sure that we can package our data in a way where we allow our stakeholders to understand the research participants better, especially, maybe they weren't able to observe all the participants. How can we actually give them a packet about the participant to read through, or if we're doing like an in-person debrief session, actually put up on the walls information about the participants and like quotes that they've talked about. And then it's a lot of data immersion, right? Like you think about, are there breakout group activities that can be centered really on a key research questions that we would want them to dive deeper into? And then like clustering and finding these patterns of behaviors. And I think mostly it's having these clustering and discussions on like, okay, here's what we clustered and here's what we see as like a really big area to understand. And then like sharing and reflecting on learnings, right? I think like a lot of our stakeholders really love opportunity, solution development. So how can we actually really ground that in the research that we've gathered and really, it helps us really think about and understand what the so what is. So that was a lot. So just kind of like wrapping with some key takeaways. So, overlooking analysis, what we need to do is spend more time really talking about it, the way we code, the way that we find themes in our data. And we really need to acknowledge how difficult it can be and really time consuming to be done properly. And then it matters because it's really thinking about analysis as an art and a science and really thinking about how analysis can empower our research practice. So we really stop seeing ourselves as a service and really start acting like a partner to the other disciplines. And then ways to improve our process too, which I just walked through, which is really thinking about the preparation that's needed. Good analysis really needs good research. Thinking about questioning your own thinking and like really, your value system, your beliefs and your interpretations. Being able to really connect the dots again and again, looking at multiple data sources and really asking yourself, so what? And then inviting others in. It shouldn't be a process that you do alone. It's actually really valuable to really have conversations and discussions with others about the data that you're looking at. And I'll just like leave you with this quote too, which is like, good research is not about good methods as much as it is about good thinking. And I think that's what we all really try to do, right? Critically think and be thoughtful with the insights that we're gathering. So that's it. That was a lot. Thanks.